to show the live albums that I like
Sure.
the most first.
Yeah.
All right,
We're recording.
we're recording.
Yeah.
Here we are again, part 2 of our Frank Zappa series.
And we have a special guest.
Yes, Frank is with us in spirit and in t-shirt.
And a t-shirt.
So today we're talking about live Zappa, and there's a lot of live Zappa to talk about. I'm going to try to cover some of my favorite live records. We can't possibly cover them all. There's just too much.
Yeah.
But I'm going to cover some of the stuff I really like, and then I'm going to cover some Philharmonic stuff. So,
yeah. I think
who's going first?
Well, I think
today?
before we even show some records, I think we maybe talked about this last week, but I think it's important to kind of mention that, like, in Zappa's world, the line between like a studio record and a live album can sometimes be kind of blurred. So some of the albums we talked about last week were released as studio records, but were basically live albums that he then edited later. So they have a very live kind of feeling, but then they sound very tight. And
Well,
so,
they were performances,
right.
as opposed to, I mean, he did everything. He did a lot of stuff where he just stacked up tracks endlessly, but he did do some actual performances in the studio, and he did a lot of live stuff
Hmm.
that he actually took back to the studio and doctored up.
Right.
Like I was telling you in our discussion last week, there were a lot of tapes that got damaged. So when the CD releases came out of some of the live stuff, I believe some of the tracks were actually disintegrated,
Right.
particularly the stuff they did 2-inch tape. You know, the ends, they would tend to put the drum tracks on the outside tracks. And so the outsides of the tapes got damaged over time. They
Right.
basically disintegrated. So they would have to re-record some of that stuff. And so some of it ended up being, live performances that had added drum tracks later,
Right.
and others were just live performances that Frank didn't like one part, and he would take it back to the studio and re-record the little snippets that he didn't like.
Right. Right.
So I guess the stuff that I tend to like the best would be the truly live, like performance art stuff.
Yeah.
So the live albums I'm going to show are truly undoctored as far as I know, but I mean, anything's possible,
Yeah.
So I'm going to start with a record that influenced me quite a lot. This is actually what probably got me into Zappa more than anything. Just another band from LA. It was definitely the first live Zappa thing I had ever heard. And I listened to this endlessly. I mean, for years and years and years. And every track on it is strong. This is in the years when he had Flo and Eddie, i.e., the Turtles,
Hmm.
as sort of the vocalists of the Mothers. So it was a really strong band. But actually, in this period, what I like the best is Frank's guitar work. I mean, his soloing was probably some of the strongest stuff he's ever done. In fact, on here, there's a selection on part side 2, the last track, Dog Breath, is probably my favorite Frank Zappa solo of all time. He just tears it up with a wah wah pedal. Just
He
an
tended to do that.
amazing solo, you know?
Yeah.
And that's something, that particular track appeared, I think, wasn't it on Burnt Weenie Sandwich originally?
Dog breath.
Yeah. it appeared here and
That's
there
about right. Yeah.
on a lot of other live things, and but this particular version is all about Frank just tearing it up. And of course, the other classic tracks, side one is all Billy the Mountain, which is one of the craziest tracks Frank ever wrote. It is 24 minutes and 42 seconds. So it's about a mountain that I believe gets drafted, and it's some crazy stuff. Goes in many directions, but side two, call any vegetable.
Call
Eddie, are
any
you kidding?
vegetable.
Yeah, Eddie, are you kidding? Magdalena, and then it ends up with dog breath. So just a great live performance. I love the inside. A little insight to Frank's world here. So yeah, so this is probably my favorite Frank live record of all of them. And this was on the Reprise label. So it's the sort of goldish brown Reprise period.
Cool. All right. I'm going to talk about, to start off, an album that I talked about a couple episodes ago, because I didn't know we were going to have a Frank Zappa week, 2 weeks of Frank Zappa. So I wanted to make sure I got it in, but I'll maybe talk a little bit more in depth about it this week. And this is Roxy and Elsewhere, which has, for me, one of my favorite lineups of his band, which is Tom Fowler, George Duke, Ruth Underwood, Don Preston. Trying to see. Walt Fowler was the trumpet player. Bruce Fowler was the trombone player. Napoleon Murphy Brock. And then two drummers, Ralph Humphrey and Chester Thompson, which you can really hear. And plus, Ruth was playing a lot of percussion, so the rhythmic aspect of this record is really, really there. And there's a lot of cool stuff. I think a lot of this music was new when they were playing it. There's a couple things I think that are from earlier on. Actually, no, I think most of it's pretty much, a lot of it's pretty much newer stuff. And let's see, we'll talk about some of these. So the first track is Penguin in Bondage.
A true classic.
It's a true classic. It's a weird song lyrically, but it's a really fun song, and it's basically a blues, but he dresses it up in all sorts of crazy, weird ways. Pygmy Twilight's really like a funky, kind of fast, up-tempo song. Village of the Sun is like kind of a unusual sort of just like vibing out sort of song, and it's about where he used to live. And Echidna's Arp of You and Don't You Ever Watch That Thing are two like really kind of balls to the wall instrumentals. And More Trouble Every Day, which is a really really fantastic song, kind of about, I guess, whatever's going on at the moment. And then the second, so it's a double LP, and then the side four is Bebop Tango of the Old Jasmine's Church, which kind of gives you a little bit of a look into their more theatrical side, which this record doesn't focus on quite as much as some of the other ones. And like we were talking about, so this is a record that's compiled of maybe, let's see, what does it say? Like 3 different performances, and then but very heavily edited in the studio. So there's like a lot of effects added and overdubs. So you kind of get a fuller view of his vision, where versus if it was just a live record or a studio record. So this is a really cool album, and there's a kind of a companion thing that I also recommend. There's going to be a couple CDs in today's episode. Don't freak out.
Oh no.
I don't think this is available on vinyl, but I could be wrong. This is, I think, a newer release, and this is Roxy by Proxy, and this is from two nights from those recordings. And there's a bunch of other tracks on here, and there's no overdubs. It's basically just the live band. And this was, I think, one of the first records I actually really got me into Frank Zappa's stuff. So this is highly recommended.
Yeah, that was a really strong band.
Yeah.
I mean, Frank had a lot of great bands, but that was definitely the pinnacle of sort of his sort of fusion-y type stuff.
Right.
Strong horns.
Yeah.
Great vocalist.
And Ruth Underwood. There's an interview you can find somewhere from maybe 5 or 6 years earlier where he's saying, I think, like, he would never let a woman in his band, or women couldn't play rock and roll or something, and he must have obviously changed his mind on that, because she's like a super essential sound in his mid 70s music.
She's a great vibist.
Yeah,
like one of the best. I think
she's
right up there with
pretty terrifying.
Jerry Burton and some of the other guys.
Yeah.
So I got to get the other obvious one out of the way here. So the Mothers at Fillmore East was the same band essentially as another band from LA. Flo and Eddie were doing vocals still. Frank was particularly satire oriented on here. The classics, of course, Mud Shark, which was sort of a dig on Zeppelin, I think.
Yeah,
a little bit,
that's
right?
what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah, and the other thing that's interesting about this record is, Frank hardly ever did covers, but there's a somewhat abbreviated version of Happy Together by Flo and Eddie when they were called the Turtles, that they kind of, feature their vocals, and it's cool. It's side 2, and then Frank actually talks about the closing of Fillmore East after that. So yeah, just a good solid live record.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think they doctored this one much, if at all. It's pretty straight up.
Yeah.
Even the liner notes are handwritten in pencil. So kind of an essential live record.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing about Zappa, is he didn't do a lot of covers, but when he did do a cover, it was usually pretty amazing. Like the version of Happy Together is like, they have all the harmonies like perfect, the energy, and the way they build up to it is with some really very lewd conversation between like a groupie and
it's
but not a groupie
between a couple songs that you would never guess would work. But in some twisted way it does. And then this side 1 ends with Willie the Pimp, and side 2 starts with Willie the Pimp, which is another sort of classic Zappa tune. So I would recommend this. This one's probably a little more lewd than some of the other live ones.
Right.
Frank definitely took the gloves off, but I think the folks at Fillmore East probably appreciated that sort of thing. It's, a little bit more risque.
Yeah. Let's see. What do I want to talk about next? I think I'm going to hold off on the symphonic stuff for a second. I think you may have 1 or 2 of these on you right now, but this is he produced a series, again, another instance of where he would kind of doctor up live performances for other uses. And this is so he wrote this he produced this I think a 3-disc record called Shut Up and Play Your Guitar, which is basically just guitar solos.
Yep.
And a lot of times, there we go.
And there's that one.
Yeah. So
this is actually different.
Yeah.
This is just guitar, and it was basically just guitar solos.
Right.
Like segments of songs done live.
Yeah. A lot of times it was like Inca Roads, or I think sometimes maybe Black Napkins or something like that. My dog's barking downstairs. I hope no one can hear that. Yeah, so I think this is the second LP in the original 3 LP set. And this is, some people, they don't like to hear about orifices, and maybe they don't want to hear about politics, and they just want to hear some guitar playing. So this is the record that he put out for the people who were probably yelling, "Shut up and play your guitar!" So yeah,
there is a box set of that too.
Yeah. There's a bunch of this stuff out there. So for anyone who's interested in some, he was really like one of I think the really early pre-shredder kind of guys. I mean, we could almost devote a whole other episode to talking about his guitar playing, but
Well, I don't think he tried to be a shredder.
no, that's just
Just
how it came out.
happened.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it had to do with his sound. Like
Yeah.
he always used pig noses, and the pig nose, for anybody that doesn't know, is like this little practice amp.
Hmm.
And he would the best example of that is go look at the Mike Douglas show performance, which from what I understand almost didn't happen, but he actually performs on the Mike Douglas show. Doesn't look like Mike Douglas or Jimmy Walker, I believe, was on there, the comedian. And I don't think anybody really knew who Frank Zappa was. I mean, they knew that they probably needed to have him on the show for some reason, but it sort of looked like one of his producers maybe said, yeah, we're having this guy on, and he's an icon, a music icon, and you should talk to him. But he asked him a bunch of really stupid questions, and Frank was fairly patient about it. And then he sort of interrupted him and said, "All right, you got to play now." And so Frank goes over, and I think he did a piece from Peaches, maybe Peaches and Regalia or something like that. It was one of his classic Hot Rats period instrumentals, but his guitar sound was just completely out of control. I mean, and I know for a fact, I heard Dweezil talk about it, that he did use a pig nose that day. And part of what his sound was all about is he would take this little practice amp, this little pig nose thing, and just turn everything up to 10. And I don't know if they were maybe cranking that through some wedges, some monitor wedges or something.
They must
But
have been,
Frank,
yeah.
basically, as soon as he stopped, it would turn into feedback. So like it was like he was riding this wave of like constant, just out of control feedback.
Yeah.
And it's great to see because it could have very easily got completely out of control, but Frank knew exactly how to mold this massive wave of sound. And that sort of describes, I think, a lot of what his sound was about.
Yeah. It was pretty raw.
It was raw, and it was right on the edge, man. It was like so close to being just pure feedback. And if you look at the way he picked, it's really weird because he used really light strings. Like his top string was a 7, and he barely picked it. He almost like scratched the strings.
Yeah.
Instead of picked them.
Yeah.
And he used the guitar in a way that most people don't do these days, in that he didn't just pick in one place. He used the all of the space between the bridge and the neck were just different tonal variations that he used.
Yeah.
So
hold on one second. We can edit this part out. My dog is barking up a storm. I gotta go take care of it.
Okay.
So you just wait. I'll leave. It's gonna
I'll just sit here and pick my nose.
Yeah,
right?
it's gonna seem to the audience like I left and come back, but there might be a lot of stuff in between. Hold on.
Make sure you edit this out.
I'm back. It was really just an excuse for a wardrobe change.
Yeah, that'll confuse people.
Yeah. All right, Zappa.
So, were you gonna show New York?
No, I wasn't. You can show that one.
Okay, I'm gonna show the New York album. This is another killer band, and as a side note, there is a new, I believe, 3 LP edition of this, like an anniversary edition with extra stuff, and there's also some really good videos floating around out there. So, just to give you an idea, this was a live album, but it was doctored. I mean, they list Ed Mann doing percussion overdubs on the album, even. So I don't know what Frank actually went back and did, but check out the band. Ray White, Eddie Jobson, Patrick O'Hearn, Terry Baggio on drums, Ruth Underwood, Don Pardo, David Samuels,
Don
the
Pardo.
Brecker brothers.
Wasn't Don Pardo? Is he the SNL guy?
He was it says Vibes.
Oh, okay, must be a different guy.
Yeah, so Randy Brecker and his brother Mike Brecker, the Brecker
yeah.
brothers, are on here. Lou Marini, Ronnie Cooper, and Tom Malone. Just a killer band. So another classic live album. Some great tracks. Titties and Beer, one of my favorites. Big Leg Emma, Sofa, Black Page is on here.
Which I think is what's on my shirt.
Really?
Yeah.
The Illinois Enema Bandit, and side 4 is the Purple Lagoon.
Cool. Let's see. Let's see. Next, I'm gonna bring out a CD. This is kind of just to make people aware of some of the projects he did later. 'Cause I don't think these are on an album, as far as I'm aware.
I've never seen them.
Yeah. So they're called. It's a series. I think there's maybe 6 or 7 of them called "You Can't Do That on Stage Anymore," and it was kind of something he did later in his life where he just went through all these different tapes and compiled them into things he thought were cool orders. But there's a lot of editing. A lot of times he'll like chop up a version of a song he did from the 70s and combine it with the version that he did from the 80s. So there's a lot of, it's kind of like a live concert that never happened with different instruments. And sometimes it'll be one person singing the first verse and someone singing the second verse. So this is volume 4. And this is a really cool, this is the one I probably listen to the most. It's got a really great version of Willie the Pimp, which then goes into Montana. This Montana is a version where they have 2 different bands playing it, but he splices it up. And then a couple selections from his Thingfish musical, which I think the versions on here are better than the versions on the original album. They're very, very raw.
Yeah, we just had a copy of that come in at the shop.
Oh yeah,
it's a rare thing.
Yeah, it's a crazy musical he wrote that I don't
Pretty
think was
crazy.
ever. Maybe it was staged posthumously, but he never got it done while he was alive. So these are cool. I think there's like 6 of these.
Yeah, I wish they'd put those out in one set.
That would be cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this is another one of my all-time favorites, Tinseltown Rebellion. And actually I think there's a couple of studio tracks, but it's like 90% live stuff. The majority of this came from the Berkeley Community Theater. Then there's a couple of tracks from the Odeum, Hammersmith in London, and the Tower Theater in Philly. But I particularly like Dance Contest on here, where he gets a bunch of people on stage and just sort of creates a dance contest in the middle of a concert.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great stuff. But Yeah. Brown shoes don't make it. Love of my life. I ain't got no heart. Fine girl. Easy meat. Uh, pick me. I'm clean. Classic titles. This is crazy, Frank. Here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the majority of this stuff is very, very improvised.
Yeah.
You
That's
know,
like his
in the middle of live
more
shows.
80s band, right? That's a
I
later.
believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably early '80s. Let me see if there's a date on here. I think it says 1981.
Okay.
So
Is
great stuff, though.
is uh Adrian on there, or is that it might
I
be Steve
don't.
Vai.
I think this is Steve Vai.
Yeah.
Let's see if there's a lineup here. It's probably different. Obviously it's from a variety of sources, so I don't even know if they list the players. Oh yeah, Frank Zappa, Ike Willis, Ray White, Steve Vai, Warren Cucurlio, Denny Wally, Tommy Mars, Peter Wolf, Bob Harrison, Ed Mann, Patrick O'Hearn. So another classic band.
Cool. I'm gonna pull out, I think, pretty much everything the rest I have today's CDs, but this is stuff that I don't think is, well, this one might be, but this is just another one sample of like a bunch of records. I think they're called the Burn the Boots or something like that. There were a lot of Zappa live bootlegs going around while he was touring. And so what he would do is he would like find them and then he would release them officially as official Zappa records so that he could
Bust
make
the
money off of them.
Boots.
Yeah, Bust the Boots. Yeah. So this is a good one. I must have found this.
This did come out in a box set originally.
Okay, yeah, this must have come out. I must have found this at a half price books or something like that. The quality is terrible. It's usually like people in the audience with the thing up. If there
Yeah.
was warping or a wrong speed, or he wouldn't even like adjust it. He just put it out as it was put out.
Well, basically, his concept was he was booting the boots.
Yeah.
So it's like if somebody was going to boot his stuff, he wanted a piece of that.
Yeah. So yeah, so this one is called Unmitigated Audacity, which is from that's a phrase from Apostrophe, who had the unmitigated audacity to come and start clubbing on one of my baby seals, and it's got a cool kind of range of stuff from earlier stuff like Wowie Zowie, How Could I Be Such a Fool, and then also More Trouble Every Day. Actually, it's a lot of it's more focused on his earlier stuff, but it's got Napoleon, Chester Thompson, George Duke. So it's kind of one of his later groups. Ruth isn't on here, which is, I wonder where it fits in the discography. But yeah, if you're a Zappa fanatic and you haven't checked these out yet, this might be a cool next step.
On that note, there were some good bootlegs put out. This is a really good one. Conceptual Continuity. This is Detroit, 1976. So this was a sort of higher quality underground release. I don't even know if there's a label. Oh yeah, it's Mud Shark Stereo is the label. But Ray White, Eddie Jobson, Patrick O'Hearn, and Terry Baggio. So it's a lot of the same stuff from the last couple I showed. You know, actually Terry Baggio is one of my favorite drummers.
Yeah.
Amazing drummer.
He was
Considering he came from like one of the sappiest 80s bands, Missing Persons.
Oh, okay. He was on. Was he on some of Jeff Beck's later stuff too? Am I right about that?
I don't know about that. He might have been. Yeah, maybe Guitar Shop.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Yeah, he's a killer drummer. So this actually had a quality label. Well, I think what they were doing is basically when they made a mistake in the pressing factory and put the wrong labels on, these guys would then press bootlegs. So they crossed out the guy's name, Billy Dexter, and wrote Zappa. So this was probably pressed at like 5 o'clock in the morning, in some fairly reputable pressing factory.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the sound quality on this is pretty good. So there's a bunch of these out there. That that's actually why Frank did his bust the boots thing, because there was so many bootlegs floating around. So
yeah. You want to talk about the next one I have is Yellow Shark, so maybe you want to talk about something before that.
yeah, I wanted to talk about some of the symphonic stuff. This is probably the best of all of them. And I was telling Garrett earlier, there is a part 2 to this, and there is a CD set where there is part 1 and 2. So what happened with this is Frank basically wrote all this music for a symphony, and of course didn't have a symphony. So he basically rented the London Philharmonic and or the London Symphony and paid them to play his music.
Yeah.
So my understanding is there probably was some doctoring later on, but it's fundamentally a live performance of the London Symphony doing Frank's music.
Mm-hmm.
So Frank, I believe, provided the charts, and they got them together, maybe rehearsed for an afternoon. I've heard Frank talk about doing this quite a bit in interviews, and he basically said he couldn't afford to, rehearse a lot. It was kind of a quick thing. He only had so much money,
right,
and it wasn't exactly what he would have wanted to do if he had endless money, but they did the best they could with his budget, and it was completely funded by him. It was put out on his label. So this was a Barking Pumpkin release. And yeah, I mean, how many guys would rent the London Symphony
yeah,
to do music that basically is in his head?
yeah.
So I'm gonna check out probably the CD version of this.
Yeah.
Because part 2 on vinyl is really expensive. It's floating around out there for like $75, but you can buy the 2 CD version, part 1 and 2, for like $15. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's important to mention at this point that Zappa saw himself kind of primarily as a symphonic composer, and he, at least in the interviews or maybe in the book we'll be talking later, he kind of the records that we know and love as his like pop records or his rock records, he said basically he made so that he could pay the bills on stuff like hiring the London Symphony Orchestra and stuff like that. So
yeah, and I think he enjoyed doing that stuff. I mean, that stuff was more about satire,
yeah,
I think.
yeah, no doubt. But there's a level of seriousness, not always, but there's a level of like seriousness in his symphonic music that you don't hear
Well,
in
level of genius.
yeah, that doesn't come out quite as much in his other stuff.
Yeah, he was a very, very serious and I think a really excellent composer of classical music.
Yeah.
And from what I understand, I've heard him say it many times. He actually was composing classical music and writing scores when he was like 14, 15, 16.
Mm-hmm.
Like he did that before he did the rock stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah,
So
his first like big influence I think was Edgar Varese, which is pretty
Edgar
unusual.
Varese. Yeah.
One of the really one of many very out there composers that were around. I think maybe the 30s and 40s, maybe 50s. And he was, and Perez was actually a fan of his later on too. There's an interview you can find of him talking about how cool it was that Zappa thought he was a big influence, and yeah, but he and you know, going along with the London Symphony Orchestra record, I think particularly in that record, you know, when he would go in, the symphony would be like, oh, we got another rock act coming in. They'd probably been used to be doing stuff like ELP and Moody Blues, which is good, but not like stuff that you'd have to like shed for 2 weeks to just to be able to play it. So when he came in, they were kind of had their noses up at him, and then they looked at the charts and they're like, ah, shit.
Yeah, well,
it's tough.
as evidenced by the fact that they couldn't play it exactly the way he envisioned.
Right.
I mean, that was probably one of, if not the best philharmonic orchestra in the world at that time.
Yeah.
Right. It was kind of as good as it got, and I'm sure it cost him a fortune to hire those guys, and he still wasn't quite satisfied.
Right.
So I got a couple more of the symphonic ones.
Mm-hmm.
You want to see those? This one actually came out on a proper classical label. So this was Boulez conducting Zappa, and basically came out on Angel EMI, which was a very proper and very highbrow classical label. So another sort of situation that kind of looks to me like Frank probably got some record label backing for this one. But Boulez was a great conductor in that time period.
And great composer.
Yeah, certainly pretty high profile.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure how this all happened, whether the label hired him or.
I think they were friends.
Were they?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
Boulez, did he study with John Cage?
I think he did. His big contribution was that he applied like Schoenberg's tone row system to rhythms.
Oh,
so
okay.
he was part of the Viennese lineage, but I think he might have studied with Cage. I mean, Cage was part of that lineage too.
And I'm not sure Frank had a lot of great things to say about John Cage. I think he respected him.
I need to look into that. Yeah.
But I'm not sure he liked him all that much.
Sure.
I mean, I think he thought some of it was just sort of, performance.
Sure.
So here's another one, Francesca Zappa. And this one actually did come out on Frank's Barking Pumpkin label. So, another one that's worth checking into, though. Let's see. Francisco Zappa lived from 1763 to 1788. So apparently he was a distant relative of Frank or something. And Donald Roller Wilson conducted this. It was performed August 22nd. Is there a year? 1983, maybe? Frank Zappa actually conducted this one. So
I don't think I've heard that one. I may have heard bits and pieces of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I haven't listened to that one as much as the London Philharmonic.
Yeah, I mean that one's like unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yeah. At that time, I won't show the record, but at that time he got really into doing synclavier work. For reasons, basically we've listed all the reasons. He was sick of musicians messing up his music, so he started working with programs that would, basically early synthesizer programs. So the kind of famous one that he made of that is called Jazz from Hell, which is not jazz at all, but it's all electronic. It's a kind of a weird listen, and a much better way to hear the kind of music that was on that record would be by listening to the Yellow Shark. This is one of my all-time favorite records. It's got a little bit of music that you can find elsewhere. The song G Spot Tornado, great title, is I think originally from Jazz from Hell. And he's got Dog Breath Variations and Uncle Meat right up in the beginning. And I get chills every time I hear that. That's really amazing. A really, really big, wide range of music on here. There's some, I think Times Beach is, I think, maybe for 2 pianos or something. Very, very, very avant-garde, more like Webern kind of sounding stuff. And then he's also got Food Gathering in Post-Industrial America, which is a kind of performance piece, and Welcome to the United States, which is basically making fun of how America let in a bunch of like Nazis after World War II and gave them jobs and stuff. So this is one of my all-time favorites. I listen to this one all the time. I don't think it's out on vinyl.
It was a multicultural thing as well, right?
Was it?
He had Tibetan throat singers.
Oh, sure, yeah. Did he?
A bunch of different sort of world styles that he fused together for that.
Oh yeah. There's like they'll break into some like reggae. They'll break into some like, you know, bump 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 kind of stuff. Like there's a whole bunch of stuff on here. It's with the Ensemble Modern, which I don't know a whole lot about.
Yeah, and I was just telling you earlier, there is a whole CD of outtakes from the Ensemble Modern.
Yeah, I'll have to check that out.
I forget what it's called, but it just came out through the Zappa Family Trust.
Nice.
So there's a lot of cool stuff coming out, a lot of box sets and stuff.
Yeah, and this actually, the really cool thing about this is you really get a feeling that everyone involved is super psyched to be part of it. Like the band or the orchestra plays unbelievable. The audience like goes bonkers after every song, which is crazy in like a classical concert where the audience is probably like in their 20s and 30s maybe.
Yeah, and he had a 20-minute standing ovation at the end.
Yeah. Well, this is I think while he was already pretty sick.
Yeah.
With cancer at this point, so he maybe conducted a couple, but not most of it. So I think this was probably a really nice project for him to have towards the end of his life, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I wish that would come out on vinyl.
That would be amazing.
Yeah. So that's all I got.
Okay. Well, I'll talk briefly before we end. This is the real Frank Zappa book. It's not a record, obviously. This is just a cool book that he wrote. There's some autobiographical stuff. A lot of it is about projects that never were mainstream, like stuff he did before the Mothers and other things like that. And there's also some like kind of theoretical stuff where he talks about his views on, you know, like framing his art in context. And there's a lot of information about what were called the porn wars, which was where Kipper Gore and a bunch of other senators' wives started trying to censor the music that was coming out, which resulted. Now we have the the explicit label that you see on a lot of records now, or not a lot, but records that are explicit.
Is that still happening?
I think it's only happening maybe on hip hop records where they want it because it's like because it looks cool. It's part of the.
It's a badge of courage.
What? Yeah.
It's a badge of courage.
Right. But so he talks about it a lot in the book. And if it's something you're interested in, there's lots of footage online of him in court, with his hair short like this, just really speaking really well, eloquently on, what he thinks the music industry should be doing and that they shouldn't be censoring their musicians. It's a great book. That I guess I found out that the guy who illustrated it ended up being a pedophile, which is kind of not cool. But the actual stuff that Frank writes in here is really, really great. Just don't look at the illustrations.
Who was it? Who was the illustrator?
Well, it says with Peter Okio Grosso. I don't know if that's the guy who helped him write it or if the guy who did the drawings. Yeah, that must have been him. But yeah, it's pretty weird. But the book itself, if you want to know like what's going on in his head, what he thinks about religion, a chapter called Church and State. What else? Yeah, it's an entertaining read. I mean, you can learn a lot about the guy just from listening to his records, but this is a good one. And also a kind of recent documentary that was just made called Eat That Question, which is all made of his interviews. It's also really
I just ordered that.
Yeah, it's a pretty good documentary.
His daughter, I think, was involved with that, right?
I don't know.
A lot of it's film clips of Frank.
Yeah, so you hear it straight from him, whatever he thinks about stuff rather than other people saying it for him.
Yeah. So I think we're probably going to just keep this as 2 parts,
Yeah,
right?
I think this is pretty well. I'll have to see how much time we took up. This might be I might need to even split this up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So next week we're going to do the ECM thing, right?
I think so. Yeah, we could talk about it, but I think that'd be a good move.
We'll just pick some favorites from ECM records.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, and
Cool.
also, so Ken, if people don't have these records we're talking about, where would they be able to find such records?
They would be able to come to Paramount Record Shop, 402 East Main Street, Watertown, Wisconsin. We're open by appointment during the week, and we're open on Fridays and Saturdays to the public. We just got a massive collection of stuff in again this week.
Wow.
So the bins are full. So whatever you're looking for, we got some cool Zappa stuff right now, which means you need to get in there.
I know.
All right. So next week, the ECM show.
Yep. All right.
See you then.
Until then, everybody, stay safe and stay healthy. Listen to some good music. Bye, everybody.